who agreed to take the oath of allegiance and remain in town, and I released him. After 2 days' search, I arrested Charles Hyde and Richard Riley, who had started for the South, and I placed them in irons. They had refused to take the oath and remain in my custody. To prevent any more incidents, I've had an order published in the local paper to the effect that hereafter, all persons embarking at Annapolis on steamer or sailing vessel will be required to present a pass from the commander of the post.
Recent incidents have made the guards at the ferrymen suspicious of any non-military activity on the waterways surrounding Annapolis. The daughters of attorney Alexander Randall and a few other young women and men were shot at by a guard for ignoring his order for them to return to the wharf. That was an act of great barbarism, said Randall, and great carelessness on the part of those in the boat. He later spoke to all involved, which, it is hoped, prevent any similar incidents that might result in someone being hurt.
Priests at St. Mary's Church kept a chronicle of matters involving the church and its parishioners and priests. Reverend Ferial Girardi, the chronicler in 1864, wrote of a visit from Cumberland by the novice master, Father Milner.
Notwithstanding the status of our redemptorist priests and seminarians at St. Mary's as conscientious objectors, we continue to feel as threatened by military conscription as we have in years past. We've been greatly reassured, however, by the arrival of Father Michael Mueller to make sure that our students and lay brothers are still not in danger and that their names have been removed from any conscription lists.
Sister Lizzie, Bernie has at last recovered sufficiently from his wound to be released from the hospital. But I was greatly concerned on April 27th when the Army sent him to Camp Parole. We were very worried that it meant he would soon be sent back to his regiment. I couldn't bear that and spoke to an officer I knew at Army headquarters. Much to our relief, he has been detailed as a clerk in the post headquarters, and we will see each other much more often.
Dear Jane, I regret we had so little time to see each other, but we knew that would be the way of things once I went to soldier. Here in Washington, we've been put to guard in supply weapons as our uniformed forces move out for Richmond. We'll be following them onto the rebels' territory. So, I don't know when I'll be able to write again. I'll be keeping you a tennis son in my heart. Pray for us.
In May, the hospital in Annapolis received a great many more prisoners from Belle Isle and other Confederate prisons. Colonel Hoffman, Commissary General of Prisoners, inspected the hospital and appeared very disturbed by the condition of the unfortunate men. He sent photographs of 3 men in the worst shape, with a request that members of Congress visit the hospital to see the situation for themselves. They were able to interview one of the men, but by the time they arrived, the other 2 had died. Colonel Hoffman believed there was a deliberate system of starvation and savage and barbarous treatment in the Confederate prisons. Some of the men were mere skeletons, damaged physically and mentally. As a result, few, if any, of the Union prisoners would ever again be able to render any kind of service or even to enjoy life.
In June, Private Samuel McLean, an Ohio farmer who was signed on as a drummer in the 114th Regiment of the Ohio Volunteer Infantry, was stationed at Camp Parole with his company. Their duty was to guard the paroled Union soldiers. He wrote home to his wife, Lucinda, describing Annapolis and its inhabitants in no uncertain terms.
Dear Lucinda, I'm not homesick, but it would be more pleasant to be at home with my family than here in this old slave state. It is composed of Negroes, dogs, fools, and rebs. This is a beautiful camp, though. It's laid out with 200 buildings, all the same. It's laid out in streets just as nice as a city. Finley Barton and I have very easy times now. We have to practice on the drum 3 hours a day. The rest of the time, We can do as we please. The rest of the boys have a pretty hard time. They have to stand guard all night. But I have nothing to do. I have no guarding to do.
Dear Sister Lizzie, a badly wounded young rebel soldier named Aaron Bennett was brought here with our Union boys and put on one of my wards. He was near death and gave me his Bible and 5 rings, requesting that 4 be sent home and that I keep one. He died the next day. As if that weren't sad enough, Dr. Vandekeep would not allow his corpse to be carried into the church for a burial service. I cannot tell you how badly I felt about that. That boy was a suffering human being. His being a rebel didn't repulse me, and I administered to his needs as though he was one of our own.
Dr. Vanderkeef, who had served in the Dutch army in the East Indies, felt differently. He stated that he would prefer to fall into the hands of the Chinese of Borneo who murder their prisoners, rather than into the hands of the rebels, where the lives and comfort of prisoners of war is a matter of such cruel indifference, if not a matter of determined policy.
Dear Lucinda, I was to church last Sunday. The house was crowded with soldiers, but only 3 women there. I thought of what a vast difference in this place from home. Here, all men and no women. There, all women and no men. The women are all so fetch and homely in this country. You need not be afraid of me bothering with any of them. I don't feel in any way inclined to. I'm becoming very much attached to this camp. I have all night to sleep and most all day to play if I choose. I'm getting lazy as a dog. I feel it will spoil me.
Union forces reached Petersburg, Virginia in mid-June, determined to cut the rail lines to Richmond that supplied General Robert E. Lee's army. The steamer Connecticut has now arrived with 600 more wounded men from the June 18th attack on Petersburg. The increased number of wounded has made it necessary to convert some of the barracks at Camp Parole to hospital buildings. We anticipate that as many as 8,000 men will soon be arriving.
We have heard that our hospital will be the rendezvous for wounded and disabled officers. There are several hundred here now and more arriving, mangled, bleeding bodies from the Petersburg battlefield. It is too sad. Now that summer is upon us, there was not a breath of air, and under the moonlight, the stretcher bearers walked to and fro with their bleeding, moaning burdens. Hundreds of them moved about with no sound to break the fearful silence. We were with the patients until 3 o'clock, getting hot drinks and wine, and then dragged ourselves to bed, only to rise early and return to this sad work. Death is doing a great work by relieving many from their protracted agony. One of our wounded officers is a colonel of the 20th Maine. We think he cannot live. His wife is with him and is one of those crying ladies. She worries her husband more than she does him good.
Colonel Joshua L. Chamberlain of the 20th Maine Volunteers is now lying in our hospital, seriously wounded. He has just received his promotion to Brigadier General by General Grant for his effective service on the field of battle, and especially for his gallant conduct in leading his brigade against the enemy at Petersburg on June 18th. This was the first time that Grant exercised his authority to issue a battlefield promotion.
Finn and me have just returned from a tramp about 2 miles out in the country to pick cherries. We got on an old Reb's farm, and he got awful mad. As soon as he went off to report us to the colonel, we took off double quick for the woods. We found another place to pick all the cherries we wanted and slipped back into camp without being seen. The Rebs will have to work sharp if they want to catch Sam McLean. Finn and me, we can take care of number 1.
In June, Catherine Steele Ray wrote to her son-in-law, Samuel Hurlbut, about her purchase of the now century-old Annapolis house built by William Pecca. Mrs. Ray's 2 other sons-in-law were both naval officers. One stayed loyal to the Union, and one went south.
Dear Mr. Hurlbut, I did not wish you to buy it, but I thought I could buy it myself, as I, with my helpless family, am sadly in want of a home, and wrote to my brother Isaac to ask Mr. Worthington to take $3,500 in consideration of its being in such a bad state of repair, which Mr. W. very generously agreed to take and willing to wait for a large portion of the money.
On June 24th, the Constitutional Convention met here in Annapolis and approved the article of the Bill of Rights that abolished slavery. It passed by a vote of 53 to 27. Not everybody was pleased with this outcome.
Reports reached us that on July 6, Confederates under Lieutenant General Jubal Early crossed the Potomac near Sharpsburg. The rebels threatened to burn Frederick and forced the citizens to pay a ransom of $200,000. Colonel Adrian Root, commander of the Annapolis Post, sent troops to Western Maryland to help resist the enemy.
Dear Lucinda, you said in your letter you were afraid we'd get catched by the Rebs, but you needn't worry about being uneasy about us. We're in no danger of them attacking us here. In the meantime, Finn and me are having a fine time. We went out to take a swim in the Chesapeake Bay. On the way, we went through an old slaveholder's farm. That was a hard-looking place.
July 10th, General Jubal Early's men seized the railroad line between Baltimore and Washington. And now we're thinking Annapolis might be invaded too. Colonel Root has instituted martial law and ordered every able-bodied man in town to build a line of entrenchments from the head of Dorsey Creek to Spa Creek. Men at the parole camp have come into town to work on the defenses, and even delegates to the Constitutional Convention are put to work. Men at the Naval Academy Hospital are digging moats and building ramparts at the two hospital gates. They put valuable hospital equipment on board two federal gunboats that arrived to protect our city. An official carried the Maryland State Seal from the State House to one of the boats offshore for safekeeping. There's a heavy guard about town. People are frightened.
The Confederates are in Maryland. The news has caused great fear and trembling in Annapolis as frightful rumors spread. Every man was obliged to dig at the grand fortifications, and we were compelled to send some of our own workmen and students to assist in the digging. After that, every man found on our streets was compelled to shoulder a musket, including two of our fathers. They refused and barely escaped unharmed before they were released.
Dear Ella, I wish you could have seen the Unionists when they heard the Confederates came into Maryland. They were frightened almost out of their wits. The military has called on the citizens to help throw up entrenchments on the outskirts of